All right, what's up, fellas? Doing another one of these question answering things real quick. Um, Before I get into the questions on the last one, someone asked on Max's training log video what Max's squat, bench, and deadlift frequency looks like. So, just a breakdown of how we are structuring his microcycles right now. Is he's got 3 upper body sessions, one session where he's doing competition style bench, one session where he's doing competition style bench against chains. And that's more of a technical teaching tool than it is a strength stimulus, though it is a strength stimulus. I think anyone who knows me knows I'm not huge on accommodating resistance. I don't think there's anything magical about it. I don't think it should constitute a huge percentage of your training volume. If you want to get good at lifting straight weight, lift straight weight. And if you're missing consistently high in the lift, rather than try to make it heavier high in the lift, you should be fixing whatever technical mistakes you're making lower in the lift that make it so difficult to finish it in what should be a more mechanically advantageous position. That being said, if you're doing it right, it can be a useful teaching tool to teach you to get into progressively more mechanically advantageous positions. So Max has a little bit of a habit of pressing his shoulders out of retraction to generate bar speed in the bench, and that ends up making his lockout harder than it needs to be. With the chains increasing in weight as it comes up, that kind of forces him to lock out in a little bit more of a sustainable manner to be in a strong position at the end of the lift. And then we have a final upper body day where he does overhead press as his main motion and then does lighter submaximal bench work as his secondary motion. So he's flat pressing 3 days per week. Right now he has one competition squat session and one pause squat session. And then he has one competition deadlift session, and he has one session where he is doing straight sets of stiff leg deadlifts. So that's kind of our current approach for him for this meet prep. And then getting into the questions left on the last one. This first one is, do you ever do beltless squats and deadlifts? Thanks. Not tremendously, right? So I think that sometimes we overthink these things. We think we're tricking our way into getting stronger, and we reinvent the wheel, right? If you want to get good at squatting with a belt, you squat with a belt, right? Can beltless training sometimes have its place? Sure. Should you be like super duper reliant on the belt? Probably not. But that being said, at the end of the day, like anything else, it's a skill and you need to practice that skill. I've even messed around with putting my belt on for the empty bar and everything from there just to practice that skill a little bit more. We're not going to make our core weaker, right? It's already shown that belts increase core EMG activity, so you're getting a higher level of ab engagement. So this idea that your core is going to get weak and wilt away by wearing a belt, probably not so founded. If one of your goals is to hit certain numbers without a belt, then I would train without a belt. But if your goal is maximal 1RM strength with a belt on, I would do the majority of your training with a belt on. That being said, sometimes I'll use like a beltless SSB as a variation, maybe a beltless deadlift. I think that if you're technically proficient in the sumo, your beltless pull should be like very close. And if it's not, that's often a sign of something you might need to work on. So I might use it as an indication of something, but I wouldn't necessarily use it as a variation all the time. That being said, I do think it's sometimes worthwhile doing, if you're doing like a lighter hypertrophy phase where you're doing really high reps, taking the belt off just because it gets in the way of breathing can be an opportunity to work in some beltless work if you want to make sure you preserve your beltless strength. I think that's the most natural place to put it. But no, it's not something I use a tremendous amount. I used to, and I have gotten better results since backing off the amount of beltless work and obsessing about what I can do without a belt on. Next one is, how much carryover did you find from snatch grip deadlifts for your regular deadlifts? You haven't posted them in a while. I got a reasonable amount of carryover. The problem is that they are technically different enough that you can't do what I did, which is train a training cycle devoid of regular conventional deadlifts and then switch back to them and expect it to go well. Even if you got all of the relevant deadlifting musculature stronger, you're going to get some level of technical decay spending that much time away from the motion. So I no longer put it as a primary motion, mostly because I can't deadlift heavy twice a week. Potentially I could have one conventional deadlift session, one snatch grip session per week, and treat both of them as primary motions, but I don't have the recovery capabilities for that, so I stopped doing them as a primary motion. They're now a secondary motion if and when I do them. Yeah, so that would be my answer is yes, I got carryover out of them. They made everything stronger, but they also got in the way of my ability to fit in enough technical practice into a training week. As a guy with a long torso, short arms, and difficulty recovering from deadlifts, I have a finite amount of hinging volume I get to play around with, and I found that putting snatch grip deadlifts as a primary motion was not worthwhile. Um, Next question is, what do you think a program aimed at maintaining either size or strength would look like? I've seen figures between 66 and 85%. Usually, work is needed to maintain. You express this volume, intensity, frequency, exercise selection, or a mix. Okay, so complicated question, breaking it down. Hypertrophy. Because that it's hypertrophy, or you said strength or size, and those are probably different questions. To maintain hypertrophy, you probably don't need to use more than 55 to 70%, probably. And that probably just comes down to a certain number of working difficult sets per week. So long as you hit that, like Mike Israetel and the RP guys will talk about a maintenance volume. I think that's probably the most helpful way to go about looking at that. Is to say, okay, well, how many difficult sets per week do I need to do for a body part? Probably in that percentage range, in like a reasonable rep range, within a reasonable proximity of failure to maintain what I have. And it's not that many. It probably varies by body part. It probably varies by individual, and it can look pretty different. I'm pretty sure I could keep a decent amount of size on my legs, doing like 4 difficult work sets per week. That might look very different for maintaining my biceps, for example. All I got to say is that's probably something you have to feel out. I can't really give good generalized frameworks because that's going to look very, very different from a large guy on steroids to a small, natty female, right? So giving a one-size-fits-all number, I think, is a little bit silly. And it would take me a while to put together a compendium of here's the variables, here's the plus minus based on these factors. And then for strength, it can be a lot less if your lifestyle variables are dialed in. Generally speaking, if I was doing a strength maintenance phase, I would probably do work in the 70 to 85% range. Again, the number of working sets within that range is going to vary based on a lot of different information, but it's a lot less work than you might think. It's a lot easier to maintain strength than it is to build it. It's just the same with hypertrophy. That being said, I think that if you do an extended training period in the 70 to 85% range, your maximal strength might temporarily decrease, but it'll come back really quickly. Just anytime you spend a really prolonged period out, like below, say, 85%, your skill at expressing what you have as a 1RM might decay, but that baseline, that base you have built to capitalize on remains. So all you need to do is run like a 3, 4, 5 week peaking cycle, and you will have effectively maintained your upper end potential. You just need to take a little bit of time to express it, right? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I regressed. I'm like, well, your unpeaked strength didn't regress, right? You went from a peaked state to a not peaked state, so where you were really skilled at expressing what you have built in the terms of a 1RM to being unskilled at it. That doesn't necessarily mean you've gotten weaker. It just means that you're in a less prepared state for that specific task. Maybe you're ready to kill a 5RM, right? So it's like you're in middle end of a strength phase. You might actually have a higher 5RM than when your 1RM is high at the end of a peaking phase. All it is that you're prepared for what you've been training. So if you've been training heavy fives, you're probably going to be the best you're going to be at heavy fives. And if you've been training heavy singles, you're the best you're going to be at expressing as a heavy single. It has a little bit more to do with just like this specific skill that you've been working recently. So for example, if I'm in a hypertrophy phase or I'm in a strength phase, my bench max probably comes down about 30 pounds if I were to take an educated guess, if I were just going and max out of nowhere. That being said, it's not something that stresses me at all because I know within probably 2-3 weeks of introducing some heavy singles, touching those 85 to 100% loads, I will be at where I was. And if I spent enough time in the hypertrophy and then the following strength phase, I'll be above where I was. I have to come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to be prepared for matching my 1RM at all times, and that doesn't mean I've gotten weaker. So that's all the questions I got this time. If you guys have any questions you would like my opinion on, leave them in the comments of this video and I will get to them in the next one.